This is your host, Bryan Betts. Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. We are at Exo Coffee Roast. I am with our wonderful pastors, Pastor Andy Littleton and Pastor Eric Siepen. So, our banter went a little bit long, and that was somebody's fault. Maybe it was me, maybe it was one of you, most likely it was me. But I heard that your church specifically has become quite a fan of, with the exception of my banter, has become a fan of the show, and that's very exciting.
I guess, yeah. They keep telling me they're listening. So, hello, church. It's good to
hello, church. Hello, the village. Hello, Japan.
Yes, and by the way, Japan, something for you. Yesterday, it was 53 degrees in the middle of the night, which I've been told from a friend of mine who used to live in Japan, that's like as cold as your winters get. So we've still got a long way to go, and it's interesting to hear of a place that has a warmer winter than us here in Arizona, but a little bit of something in common right there. A little fun fact.
Yeah.
Or based on someone's experience, maybe not cataloged information. But, yeah, I wanted to dive into that really quick. I haven't been able to give you some time to speak, but you've also been eating. How's your sandwich?
Hey, it's great. And today it comes with spicy pickles. It's just, is it me or we're at Exo Coffee in Tucson? It's just kind of hopping today. There's more people.
There's
more
I was going to say
conversation.
that. It's people maybe have a hard time hearing us today just because of how many people are here.
It's just a lot of people. But hey, if you're in the area or near an airport in Japan, fly on down, come to Exo. And today, if you get here today, if you get on that airplane really quick, spicy pickles.
Yeah.
And they're good. And everything here's kind of locally sourced and delicious. And it's great. We love this place. So thanks to XO for letting us hang out. And anyway, back to the topic at hand. Sorry, Bryan. Definitely thought I'd make a little shout out there.
No worries. So, what are our listeners looking like, Pastor
Our listeners, we're up to 74 listeners.
Awesome.
So I think one time we hit 80. So we're kind of flexing between 75 to 80 listeners, but our goal, as we've been saying, is 1,000 listeners. Mm-hmm. We want to turn this into a big thing, become superstar podcasters.
Oh, that's it? That's what we're doing?
That's,
Feel free to like it and subscribe, whatever that looks like. Like us on Facebook.
We're on iTunes. We're on a couple other podcasting things that I don't remember.
Apparently we believe in small churches and big podcasts?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Small. In fact, I think that is our name. Small churches, big podcasts.
Yeah. So feel free to share it with your friends. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we want this podcast to be a little bit later. But first, we have a conference coming up. Not we, but specifically Pastor Eric Siepen is planning this conference, the Village Conference, correct?
Yes, the Village has a discipleship conference happening November 2nd to November 4th. It's 2.5 days long. It's $65. There's even some housing accommodations if you sign up quickly. There's scholarships. People from all over the country are coming. In fact, hopefully, some people from Nepal are going to be there, and Ghana. We're really this is exciting. We're talking to consulates. We don't know if this is going to happen, or helping people get their visas and that stuff. But they're definitely interested and wanted to be part of it.
Eric, I'm gonna admit something right now. Like, I don't know if I believe you.
I'm telling you the truth. I'm telling you,
I'm hearing this,
the honest truth. It's pretty crazy. Yeah, that's been really surprising. They just randomly found it on the internet, and our administrator's been in conversation with them. So
that's amazing. That's crazy.
That has been really cool.
The mic is turning.
Oh wow, it's facing me.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go. There's a red light. The red light.
That red light's always pointing at me, so I figured maybe that's why I speak so quickly and nervously. So let's see what it does to you.
Man, it's like, it's bright. So you can go register at the Village Conference 2017.com. Mm-hmm. You can see pictures of me. You can go through the links. You can see the schedule, the hotels that are available. Yeah, it's. I'm excited. It's still a little nerve-wracking, but I think the big part of our community is that we don't have to have it perfect. We're going to offer what we have, and in our brokenness, we hope that the Holy Spirit will show up and transform people. So,
and with all these people coming from all these different places, just as important, we want you there too. So go to the link again. That's villageconference2017.com. Yes.
That's right.
So I have a quick confession.
Uh-oh.
So I'm not going to I'm not taking anything back about my criticisms of the fidget spinner, but I'm a part of a wine club, and I don't drink wine, so I know that's very confusing. One day I'll probably explain that whole process. But sometimes
do you have a fidget spinner that doesn't spin?
No, I'll explain it like that. They send these little good packages, like there's loot crates of different companies, stuff like that. They have their own thing called NP goods, Knocking Point goods, and in this most recent shipment that I wasn't expecting because I had canceled because I'm moving, I got a fidget spinner. And thankfully it's not this crappy cheap plastic one. And all the criticisms that I had of the fidget spinner, I'm not taking any of those back. But
if there's anyone that needs a fidget spinner, it's Bryan.
If anyone needs a fidget spinner, it's me. That is very correct. And I love my fidget spinner. Really? I think it's so much fun. I didn't bring it today because yeah, I really just leave it at home and I'll just spin it a few times and then set it down. But yeah, I just want to confess that I have one, and I do have made criticisms about it. I don't take those back, but I just wanted to let you guys know.
I'm really glad that you got that out.
Yeah,
sounds like something you really needed to talk about.
I know, it's really important to me. But there's something that you really wanted to talk about today. Yeah, there was an article that was published recently, and there's been a lot of news.
There are a lot of articles.
There are lots of articles. Yeah, there's no shortage
of articles.
This is the only one. No, it's regarding. There's been a lot of protests from the NFL players around.
It's the NFL. It's the NBA. I mean, we got the Golden State Warriors, Steve Kerr. I mean, that's just the tip of the. These are the guys that are getting a lot of airtime at the moment. Yeah. I mean, just on a note, is it getting to you at all just utterly overwhelming and hard to care because of just how much stinking information there is and how many articles and how many things go? I can't keep it straight. My wife texted me in the morning yesterday. I was walking over to our neighbor's house and she said, "Are we at war with North Korea?" And I was like, "I have no idea. I seriously don't know.
I don't even know.
And I don't know how I would even tell anymore."
Yeah.
And I just got on and then I get on the internet and it's so Trump's tweeting, which is no surprise, and North Korea is saying that we've declared war through that, and then you've got, people boycotting the NFL or, becoming NFL fans for the first time in their lives or whatever, or deciding they hate the Golden State Warriors and deciding the Warriors aren't so bad after all, and even though they've never watched sports or whatever, and people are just going berserko. Well, that's just that was yesterday, and I have this sneaking suspicion that today there's about 1 million new articles, and we've all moved on. I heard something that the news cycle is something like 4 hours right now. That a news story is only relevant for about 4 hours.
Yeah,
I can't keep up.
And a lot of times they'll just take the same topic and spin it, and they'll add more to it.
Yeah,
it's just crazy.
Well, I think it's become, when you go to the doctor's office and you hear the music playing in the background and you sort of recognize the songs, but you're not really thinking about it, and you're like, oh yeah, that's Prince, or oh yeah, and then you just kind of move on.
It's Bruce Hornsby.
Yeah, it's now that's what CNN is, and that's what it's just background noise.
Yeah, so you have a specific article in front of you that you've pulled up for us and had mentioned to us previously. What article are you referring to?
Yeah, so this one kind of caught my eye in the midst of all the fray. And so it was interesting because Washington Post, and it was by, it was in a faith section. I think this isn't a regular writer there. His name is Michael Frost. He seems to be a faith writer, probably.
Michael Frost. We're talking about Michael Frost, yes.
Oh,
he's from Australia.
Yes, he's from Australia.
He wrote The Shape of Things to Come.
Oh, see, look at that.
Yes.
Eric knows who he is.
My co-pastor, kind of your mentor of sorts, has sat many hours with Michael Frost and talked to him. So
Michael Frost. Look
there
at
we
that.
go. So we are two, what is it?
peas
degrees,
in a pod.
2
No,
degrees of separation from Michael Frost, who we're about to hear about.
There you go. Okay, so yeah, Michael Frost. So he was in Washington Post, and it's a tale of two Christians on their knees. So he's talking about Tim Tebow and Colin Kaepernick, both who, in their own ways, like by bowing publicly on television as NFL players, have made stands as Christians. It would seem so. I didn't realize Kaepernick was a Christian, but I guess he actually was. I think he was adopted. They were getting into and raised in a Christian home, and has a lot of, there's a lot of faith behind a lot of his thinking. He exercises that very differently, probably applies it in very different ways than a good old Tim Tebow. And then you had Tim Tebow, who was kind of the poster boy, for Christians. Well, he was in the NFL and has made quite a career of that, and in college, yeah. And by bowing, and everybody, so everybody loved it in Christian circles, right? So in Christian circles, you loved the bowing Tim Tebow. But outside of Christianity, it was kind of a mockery, like, what a joke, right? Mm-hmm. And then now, within conservative circles, I would say, people are just furious at Colin Kaepernick. But if you're outside of the church, you love it. You love that he's bowing. You love, what he's doing, which has this religious significance. And so Michael Frost is getting into, like, here's two men who kind of represent, two different sides of the coin, but they both have their reasons that tie into Christianity.
They're both on the coin.
Yeah, they're both on the coin, and he suggests at the end that it shouldn't be one or the other. It should be both. That Christians should bow for both reasons. That the reasons Tim Tebow does and the reason Colin Kaepernick does, not one or the other. So this just makes me think of. There's all sorts of questions that have come up in our community, at our church, like, how do you engage in a secular world? And so here's two guys who are in the public eye attempting to engage with the secular world as Christians. One way is appealing to some, one way is appealing to others. Yeah, I don't know. I just want to see where that conversation takes us. What do you think?
Well, it seems like if we're going to talk about it, we have to talk about what is our role as followers of Jesus in the political world, because these are political statements, right? They're saying with Colin Kaepernick that they, one, can't pledge allegiance because of particular acts of the state that seem to go against what they think is the way of the gospel.
Yeah.
Right? So there's that. With Tim Tebow, it's his personal life being modeled in front of people, and he believes in that.
Right.
That life with the touchdowns and the honoring of God and all that kind of stuff is something he does in his private life.
At least we assume.
Well, and we know from what's been documented of how he goes about offering himself outside of his professional life and caring for people, and he intertwines that with evangelism, where Kaepernick might be a little different. But really, I guess the question for me is, how am I supposed to be involved politically?
Right.
Am I called to make statements? Mm-hmm. What's it mean to pledge the allegiance? So my kids being pledging the allegiance in class,
right?
What to the state? Like, what are we? Yeah. What are we doing here? It's a good conversation.
There's all sorts of interesting stuff there. Yeah, how do you... I remember I grew up in a Christian middle school, and I remember it struck me that we had to have a Christian flag. Mm-hmm. Right? And which was... That always just seemed kind of odd to me as a kid. I don't know why. But we pledged allegiance to America, and we pledged allegiance to the Christian flag. And... these days, like that, just the concept of both of those, like, why did we model kind of statehood when we attempted to pledge allegiance to Christ? Why did we model it after the way that we pledge allegiance to states? It's almost like, I don't know, that seemed odd to me. And then, what does it mean to pledge allegiance to a country?
Well, and I think it's so ingrained in our American politics. The 13 original colonies up to the 1800s most of them still in their state legislations you had to pledge allegiance to Jesus to be a legislator. So you had to make those two things, even though we had separation of church and state, were married still. And they have all been in our country. But I think what Peter says when he says we're sojourners, like if you talk to the average Joe Christian, does not see himself as a sojourner. Right. Somebody who's wandering through, who doesn't belong to America, is only present in America. And that's you have to begin to ponder, what does that mean to not belong here?
Yeah. And it seems like, I mean, I'm not the great historian here, but it seems like over and over there have been these attempts or experiments to create like to bring Christianity to bear in the world, to have like a haven, if you will, and so where Christianity rules. And
yes.
Of course, there's the Roman Empire version of that. The Holy Roman Empire. There's that. Then there's stuff like John Calvin's Geneva. Where Geneva's going to be and it really was like it thrived. It wasn't done perfectly, but it didn't stick. You could say like something like Abraham Kuyper in the Dutch tradition. That, somebody like our co-pastor Rod would be more familiar with. That,
well, and pretty much the whole Puritan movement in the United States is a big part of what we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, right. And then it transfers over to where the United States are viewed as somewhat of a fulfillment of prophecy and a fulfillment of promises, shadowed back in the book of Exodus and stuff like that. So now so if that were the case, if this was indeed, like if America was the culmination of all biblical prophecy, which...
We're in trouble.
Yeah, we are in trouble. And we don't have really good reasons to think that would be, outside of being ethnocentric.
Right.
But it, if it were, then it would make sense to assume that our government would be, absolutely bowing its knee to Jesus Christ at all times, as it should be, or whatever. But if it's not, if this is just another nation that rises and falls, and then righteousness, doing good things in accordance with the law of God would be good and beneficial, but we are not the culmination. This is not where it's all going to happen. Then this assumption, doesn't make a lot of sense. But I think we all do live, many of us, if not all of us, like there's a little piece ingrained that we're something very special.
Yes.
And that somehow God's involved in that. Yeah, and we at least grew up with families or in a culture that assumed that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder if you take Kaepernick's kind of position that he's viewing the bowing during during the national anthem, right? I'm not watching enough sports to actually know how this works.
This is another reason we're weird pastors, is we don't watch a lot of football.
The issue is that maybe he views this as like a statue of Nebuchadnezzar. He views it as he's trying to say, this is not the God. I'm not going to bow to something, but he's actually bowing to a different God. He's not going to do the thing that you're supposed to do for this God.
I think that originally Kaepernick saw the United States, and what it was supposed to stand for was inequality.
Equality.
It was supposed to. Yeah, I know. It was supposed to stand for equality,
right?
But he wasn't seeing that in the events that were transpiring around him,
right?
So he refused to stand because of that,
right?
And I feel like now it's basically become this thing of the national anthem and the flag is not being protested. It's just becoming the vehicle for.
They're saying you're not upholding this.
Yes.
Like the values that undergird it.
Yeah. It's become a vehicle for protesting racial inequality and everything.
I mean, this is very much connected to racial inequality.
Yes. Yeah.
Which goes back to one of our better podcasts that we talked about that issue.
Yeah.
But I think that a lot of players aren't saying like we hate America and everything like that. But you did touch on something regarding Peter being a sojourner and like a wanderer, and kind of the idea of us being wanderers as well. So what extent are we supposed to be wanderers, and how involved should we be in politics as everyday Joes, everyday believers?
Those are very great questions, and there's the divide. What he's saying in this article is he's getting just at that divide that exists within Christianity, and he's saying we're seeing it, sneak into NFL game time, and essentially he's saying that there's there are two sides of the church. One is very kind of like you were saying, Eric, like dealing with the personal relationship with Jesus Christ, personal sins, a personal gospel. This is my faith, Tim Tebow, being lived out in front of you. Look at my personal life, and I have personal convictions. Right. And then the other is more of a public protest, kind of suggesting I can't stand within this system. I can't do what this system is doing. I need to expose it. And those are, it's a public and political, gospel, that the gospel touches all of those things. And people seem to be very, unsure about the two. They kind of go back and forth, like on certain issues, because he was saying the Tim Tebow folks in the world, you get into issues like gender and abortion and stuff like that, and all of a sudden it is a public issue. It goes beyond the private life, right? In those areas that they would view as touching in on personal morality, right? But then something that's more systemic, that somebody would say, look, this is a systemic injustice that goes way back. Those people would say, look, no, that's not something that affects me personally. So, and so you can't call out the whole nation on something like this. But Kaepernick's kind of coming from a different school of thought, in which you should and you do those things.
Well, it seems to me, though, that, if we look, this whole way of even analyzing how we understand ourselves in the context of government is new. Yeah. Because if we look at a Pauline mode, or you look at Peter, or you look at Jesus, Kaepernick is not following that, and neither is Tim Tebow. No. Because theirs is very built around the gospel being the transformative thing, not through public demonstration. Paul raised up, he got himself in trouble by casting out, the demon out of a woman who was driving him nuts, but not because he was just bad. He wasn't
trying to make a point.
Yeah, he wasn't trying to, okay, I'm going to go do this. He understood what kind of upheaval that was going to create in the culture. He didn't want that upheaval. He decided that that's what God was calling him to. But so it's hard for me now because we have so much freedom. We can talk about the systemic injustice. Nobody was talking about the systemic injustice in the Roman Empire.
Of which there was an insane amount.
Yeah. And Paul's little narrative on sexuality in Romans is a chapter. Yeah. And he makes it just very clear in a very perverse place. He's like, okay, well, this is the perversion. Now let's move on to who the Spirit of God is and what he's done and who Jesus is.
And there seems to be an assumption in Paul and Jesus and the apostles, and I would venture to say even a lot more of the Old Testament than we like to realize. There's an assumption that the culture, by and large, is not going to be the haven for the faith. In fact, it will be exactly the opposite. And so when you go in with that assumption, you're not looking for the culture to live out the faith. Right. And so both Tebow and Kaepernick are asking the culture to live out the faith. Yes. And there's an interesting tension, because there's a lot of folks that... I like that. That's good. There's a lot of folks that don't want the culture to live out the faith, but then all of a sudden when the faith undergirds an issue that's dear to them, then maybe I do. Right. Right. But that's what both of these guys are looking for.
Brian's about to make a point.
Yeah, Brian's about to make a point. Village folks, this is what the train is all about. When the train goes by, Brian's having a thought, we stop and we ask him, Brian, what's your point?
There you go. There it is.
There it is. Wow.
And the point is always
over.
Pretty much
that train was so good.
But before we lose your point, can you repeat what you said? Because you said both Kaepernick and Tebow are asking the culture to live out the values of Christianity.
Yeah, to live out the faith.
To live out the faith.
Yeah.
I think that's profound because in some ways there's a flaw in both of their ways of proceeding.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then so with Paul and some examples I've been thinking about in the Old Testament, there's Daniel, and we've talked a little bit about this, Daniel in Nebuchadnezzar's Babylonian kingdom. But then another one that really interests me that I was reading about recently would be Joseph in Egypt.
Right.
And so here are people who are a part of a covenant with God. They're within. There's a community of God that they understand that they're a part of. They have very specific promises of God that have been given to them. God's made them His own, and then they're placed in the middle of a secular culture, and they seem, and from my reading of it, to understand that secular culture is not the haven for them. Right. It's not the haven for the people of God. They're in it. They're in the midst of it. And the whole story of Israel in the Old Testament is different, and it's pointing to something. That's a government ruled by God that's pointing us to something. It's pointing us to a future reality that none of us have ever seen. But that's not the norm, and the Israelites are always being placed in these other secular environments, and I think that's what we learn from. So I think about Joseph, who rises through the ranks and becomes very influential in Egypt. How did he do it? Wasn't Egypt? I mean, I don't know as much about ancient Egypt as I should, but I'm assuming they don't worship the one true God. I'm assuming there are practices that are problematic. We know that they were racist.
Right.
And so how does Joseph become an influencer there? Does he get there is he protesting? Is he making a scene? Is he acting as a prophet to them?
It's interesting that he even makes it as a slave. I mean, he raises up as somebody who was sold into slavery in prison. Yeah. So what he uses is the divine knowledge of God.
Right. Yeah.
He uses the divine power. Yes.
Yeah. Power and the wisdom and the Spirit of God.
Yes.
That kind of baffles people. That the things he does make sense and work.
Right.
And I can't imagine he got here by walking into Pharaoh's palace and going, "I won't, this government's corrupt. I can't stand you. I won't have any part of it." I mean, you're not going to get trusted and promoted. At some point, he had to decide, I'm a stranger here.
Right.
And I'm going to be faithful to my God, and I'm going to seek His wisdom and His power in the midst of this situation. And the same would be true of Daniel in Babylon. And so then there are certain places you won't go. Right. And there are certain things you won't do. Yeah. But your goal is not to make that secular state conform to the faith that you profess.
Right, and I wonder, a lot of times we want the culture around us to conform to basically, for a shortened version, the Ten Commandments. We want them to conform to that instead of being transformed by the power of the Holy Spirit in us. Right. So, and I think a lot of that is because evangelicals and fundamentalists, maybe us, we've lost our sense of power. Yeah. Like the Holy Spirit, like of the fire.
We think that the power that we need is that sheltering of the faith by the government.
Well, and it's interesting, Jeremiah 29, when the Israelites are in exile and they want out. I mean, they're looking forward to going home. God says through Jeremiah, no. And not only that, you get married, plant gardens, make this your city and pray for it, because how it goes, you go. Yeah. So it's not like transform this city into a Jewish city. It's hunker down here, create your communities, and pray fervently for the community so that it will succeed, so that you can succeed.
Yeah, seek the good of the city.
Yeah, I think that's different. Seeking the good of the city is very different than political activism. Yeah. And now, we better learn to figure out how to explain that.
Right. And because, then there is, that's where it does get a little sticky, because somewhere in there, like the good of the city, if somebody's being oppressed, does seeking the good of the city mean you say something like, say, no, this isn't right, and stand against it?
Yeah, well, that's a good question.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever listened at all or followed Dave Gibbons from New Song, but one of the things that he said that really impressed me, made me think for a while, is like we use the wrong matrix for our churches.
Yeah.
We use numbers and baptisms. We don't say, okay, there are this number of churches in a community, so what's the crime rate?
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the poverty rate? Because he says if the church is successful, then the city will be successful, and that those numbers will be lower because of the community. And then you're like, wow, we have strong churches because they're bringing the gospel to bear.
Yeah.
And a lot of that has to do with we don't stand. I think there's a difference between standing with the oppressed and protesting for the oppressed.
Yeah.
And I think we have to figure out what that means, because I think it means that their struggles have to become our struggles.
It needs to be deeper. I mean, there was an interesting piece on the TV show Blackish, and I
love Blackish. It's a great show. It has some things that I'm uncomfortable with, but yes, it definitely makes me uncomfortable. It makes me think.
Yeah, and I was listening to some commentary from behind the scenes, and one of the writers was saying that essentially it was like he had encountered something with one of his kids where they had done something in protest that he looking back on his life, like in earlier times when protest meant you actually stood next to somebody and risked being beaten with them and on their behalf.
Right.
And he was like, so you're protesting by, I think it was putting an all black screen on your Instagram, like that's a protest? Hold on.
Right.
And so there is something that we're losing, and maybe that goes back to my whole thing about just how much stinking news there is and how much like barrage of content. But a real protest would need to cost you dearly. I mean, think about now Daniel in Babylon, right? So when he does protest something, when he refuses to bow, in his case, so he's not just bowing publicly, he's refusing to bow, and he's bowing very privately in the closet of his room.
Yeah.
But when he refuses to bow, it's he and his friends are gonna suffer together, and they decide that they're willing to do that, right? And there's something very different about being willing to suffer with somebody, which is the definition of compassion,
right?
Compassion, suffer with. Like that, when you really deeply, when this matters to you, you're willing to suffer for it. And I'm not saying Kaepernick nor Tebow don't suffer for some of the stuff they do. I think they might. Yeah, both of them in their own ways.
I wonder. I'm just curious when you say that. What do you think the gods of our culture? Like, what are the gods that the culture itself, both in political and social and all those, are asking us to bow to?
Oh yeah.
That we shouldn't be bowing to. Like that's going to cost us if we don't bow.
Yeah. Self-expression is one that comes to mind, and that's an interesting one because it's very intriguing. I want self-expression, right? Who doesn't?
Yeah.
I mean, there would be. I don't know. I immediately think of. James K. Smith's recent books, like Desiring the Kingdom and You Are What You Love, and he talks about...
Yes, I like his books.
Yeah, plug. But he talks about a few things, like, and one of them is actually sports, and like sports, entertainment, consumerism. One of them is kind of, nation, state, military, like that you will love this more than God and defend this first. This will be number one.
Right.
I recently saw a post by someone that I know and love and respect, and they listed 3 things that they said will never change about them. And the first was support for the military, the second was support for the police, and the third was belief in God. I thought the order of that was really
very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, those off the top of my head. Those are a couple I see. How about there's more?
I think when you talk about self-expression, I think that my right for self-expression, my right to have my opinion being heard, my right to having people around me who agree with me. I think America, I think selfishness is such a big god in our culture, and it's a subtle God, but we're all asked to bow to ourselves, and it's self-service. Like, I mean, McDonald's is like the epitome of who we are in so many parts of our lives. So what does it look like to be a Christian in that? What are we calling people to? I mean, I think I like what you said about to be compassionate. I can't be selfish.
Right.
To have the law of Christ, which Galatians talks about, which is love God and love others. There's your protest. How do you play that out? You sit next to the person who is politically opposed to you, and you love them, and you just feel super uncomfortable.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And there's so many ways that we do that.
Yeah, and think about what that could do. I was just yesterday really good. I rarely post on anything on Facebook anymore, and I posted something about TV shows watching because there was a show on the idea of myth and eternity. I forget the name of it exactly, but it was C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien's relationship, and it was on PBS.
Okay.
And it was excellent. It was very good. A lot of different. There were perspectives of their ways of thinking, but really good stuff. And it all centered around the discussion that seems to have led to Lewis's conversion from being kind of an atheist agnostic to being a Christian with Tolkien and I'm forgetting the name of the other. Chesterton was influential, but it was started with a D last name. For some reason, it's skipping my mind.
MacDonald, right?
MacDonald was also, and I'm about to quote MacDonald.
He was part of that group.
Chesterton and MacDonald were influential in Lewis's life, but the discussion, there was another guy from the school. I'm forgetting. I'm sorry.
breaking out too.
But these people, walked with Lewis for a long time and for years and had a lot of meaningful discussions with somebody, and they disagreed. And they had this interesting discussion about myth and when what myth really points to, and that myth can be true, and that the myths point to something that's actually true in history, and that when historical truth and myth and the beauty of myth combine, then you found something really deep and meaningful and true. Anyway, there was a quote by George MacDonald that pushed Lewis over the edge in Surprised by Joy. He writes about it in his final chapter, Checkmate. And this was the quote that I think gets at this, what we're talking about right now. And MacDonald's quote is, "The one principle of hell is, I am my own."
Yeah.
And that was, and he was talking to the Western world, and that's pretty applicable to anybody. And I think we're still there. I mean, we can protest and we can put our faith out in front of everybody all day long, but at the end of the day, that idea, I belong to myself, that's the hard one to renounce.
Right.
Anyway.
So what I found is interacting with, I would say I don't have conversations on Facebook about politics. I stay as far away from it as possible. But I have a lot of very politically active friends, and I'll see my liberal friends argue with my conservative friends, and then you'll see friends of friends and be able to comment on that. And then you're just having these conversations or arguments, and you see a picture and a name, but really what really defines your view of that person is that idea or topic that you're talking about, and not this whole person that you're conversing with.
Yeah.
I feel like it's so important to have these conversations face-to-face with your community, and that's really real impact happens. Not necessarily on Facebook in the conversation. I feel like God can still move in those ways and make impacts there, but it's so crucial that we have those conversations face-to-face with lifelong conversations, hopefully.
Right.
But one thing that I wanted to have a discussion about that I didn't clear beforehand, but next week Andy will not be with us. It'll be me and Eric. We had a wonderful conversation towards the beginning of this podcast between me and Andy, just us two, about his life. And I'm hoping to have that conversation next week with Eric.
After we had one about Bryan, but he won't.
He's
refusing to let it go on the air.
The reason why is because we're going to have that conversation in 2 weeks. Next week, actually 3 weeks. Next week will be me.
Or
and
we'll
Eric.
just post the one that we already did.
Once you get to Korea, sorry, buddy.
Next week, we'll have that conversation with Eric, and the week after, we'll have Pastor Rob and Pastor Rod. I'm so sorry, Rod and Pastor Nick. And so the five of us will get together and have a great conversation.
I should say, I think that's all going to happen.
Yeah, we're hoping in 2 weeks that's what we're going to be putting on there.
Yes.
It's possible.
And the week after that will hypothetically be the conversation about me. Reluctantly, but what will happen because it will be my last podcast. And we've had so many different conversations about a lot of different topics. And from things about worship that have been very there's no outside influence happening causing that conversation to have worship. It was what if we talked about worship? And great. We had Mike on. We had that conversation. We had a conversation with the philosopher. We also have been talking about current events. And as people from your churches are listening more and more, and we're having people from Japan and Paul listen more and more. And the possibility,
nobody's listened from Nepal yet.
Yeah.
But Germany, and so it's basically Arizona, Germany, and Tokyo. Those are the only people who listen to this podcast. California does have the occasional listener.
I
think we have one listener in California.
So as we get to this place, eventually you guys will get to, hopefully, to 1,000 viewers, and maybe I'll join back on ship after I get back in a year from Korea, depending on what it looks like. But that's what my next question is: what do you guys want this to look like, and what do you think that it will? Because there's a lot of political conversations that don't necessarily won't happen in the church. That you won't be like, well, here's a political statement. But would that ever even happen? The train.
Do you hear the train? I mean, Bryan's point is...
Brian is going, he's monologuing it.
He is.
I know.
He's monologuing hard, but the point's coming, and we know that.
I know. I'm trying to get through this and that explanation, but in terms of what you want this podcast to be for the viewers and the listeners, what is your hope for this podcast?
Well, I would answer that by saying kind of the reason we started it was that we once had some breakfast together where we had really great conversations about, and it varied. Because you know what it's like when you go out to breakfast with somebody and you don't know where it's going to go?
Right.
And sometimes there's something in the news and that gets you, and you find out you view it the same or you view it different and whatever, and you have a good conversation about that, and then you learn something from that conversation. Or it has nothing to do with anything in the news, and it's just something that one of you has experienced or that's on your mind or something that's going on in your church. And so for us as pastors, we had these breakfasts before we were on the radio show and just found those conversations to be good. And we were like, well, the radio show's over. What if we shared those conversations?
Right.
So I guess what I would hope is that Eric and I would continue to be friends and continue to have good conversations and learn from each other, and that we would continue to invite people to the table via the podcast for wherever that goes.
Yeah.
That's
and I have, somebody at our church volunteered to take your place if we were looking for somebody. It's a young woman in our church who is definitely, she's an interviewer, so she would kind of press us pretty hard.
I said, a face of fear.
Yeah, I said, well, that might be something we were interested in trying out at times, is having some guest hosts, people who might interview us or have us kind of think through things we wouldn't ordinarily think through when we are kind of just dialoguing back and forth. So maybe we'll have a series of guest hosts who will, force us to talk. But my thing is, when I hung out with Andy, what I realized is that when it comes to being, I'll use some churchy words here, but when it comes to being missional, Andy and I are on the same coin. We're heads and tails. When it comes to being Calvinist, we're both Calvinists, but we're heads and tails. So we say the same things, but we come at it very differently.
Yeah.
All these things were like so alike, and yet it's basically we're the single coin. And I thought it makes for a really fascinating conversation. We're both young, kind of in the alternative church mode, but we've done that very differently. And so it's just fun. Like, it's a conversation where I'm like, wow, things go deep very quickly, and I don't think people actually get to see that or hear that in the United States or all over the world. I think we have something very unique and cool to offer.
Right.
And so I'm like, hey, let's keep offering it and see if people like it.
And it does seem like there's got to be like pastors out there that get together and talk, but nobody else is invited to listen in.
Yeah, totally.
And so that's, and I think, and we're unique even among. I like what you're saying. There is a lot of common ground for us, but there are a lot of differences. Even when we're saying the same thing, we're saying it in a different way, or we have a different definition. But I think it's helpful to work through that and have people listen in.
Yeah, and I think when you say the different thing, both of us, what we have in common is that the structures that we worked in, we always agreed with them, but said them differently or thought about them differently or thought they could be practiced differently. And so when we got together, it turns out that we also thought differently but the same. So it's just made this really nice combination. So that's why we're here. We'll just keep doing it.
So look out for more of that.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to, we're sneaking up on 47 minutes here, but really quick, Bryan asked a question about how do we do this or whatever earlier on our topic of the bowing and everything, and where that article concluded, in my mind, this is my assumption on it, but it seemed to me that what he was saying was that the church should be, maybe in my words, more awkward, meaning like we should have, like Colin Kaepernick and Tim Tebow should go to the same church.
Amen.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
They play on the same football field. They should go to the same church. And I think our churches have tasted some of that. Like in recent times, with a bigger divide between liberals and conservatives, both of our churches have both.
Yes.
And so it hasn't been just like we are the conservative bastion of the Christian faith or the liberal side. It's like we have a mix of these views and a mix of these values, but a common faith in Christ.
Yes.
To where that has to work out in relationship.
And it's hard.
It's super hard.
It's really hard.
Yeah. And I guess my answer to that would be, I think it should get worked out in the body of Christ as believers, especially. And Kaepernick and Tebow should be in the same church.
Right. And I think I'd like to end with just going back to what you said, that both Kaepernick and Tebow in some ways are asking the culture to live out of faith that in some ways is not fair, that they're imposing something on a community that I just don't think that's the way. It's not going to work.
Right.
And it's I like that. I want to ponder that some more, maybe even talk about more about what that looks like on some future podcasts. We could come back to that. Yeah,
that'd be good. And then the idea that you've been saying, which is key, is like, if what the scriptures are saying, Old Testament, New Testament, we are aliens, we're strangers here. What does it mean to live in a land that's not a shelter for us, that's not safe? And to understand that, to own that, and to be faithful to God, even though that's not, never going to be the thing to do.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm very thankful that both of you have created spaces where those conversations can happen and you can pursue that in an honest way and not have this high expectation that you have to do it perfectly. Pastor Andy, Pastor Eric, thank you so much for joining me again at EXO Coffee Roast for Faith Over Breakfast. One last time, a reminder to go to villageconference2017.com, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Yeah. And look into that. We'd love to have you join us.
And before we end, I wanted to say something I thought when I was driving here. If you are ever down around EXO Coffee and you get some coffee, just say to the barista, hey, I come here because Faith Over Breakfast is podcasting, and I really like it here. So and thank them for letting us have the upper room.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah, they're super generous. So thank them. Patronize them, meaning eat buy their stuff. Yeah.